lecture video, I should say. We're going to just kind of briefly talk about imperialism in the Middle East, and then you'll kind of look at some different sources in class that kind of emphasize some of the things we talk about. And so when we talk about imperialism in the Middle East, we have to focus on how European influences spread into former parts, or even in some cases, current parts of the Ottoman Empire. So here we have the Ottoman Empire, a map of it, right? Its greatest kind of extent was in the year 1683, where it came very close to taking over the city of Vienna, which is the German-speaking city, right? That would be considered like really Central Europe. They were not successful, the Ottomans. They lost that battle. And so from that point on, gradually the Ottomans will decline. And so by 1914, which is the start of World War One, which is also then the kind of the formal end of the Ottoman Empire as World War One, you have just kind of the darker shaded gray brown region here as the Ottoman Empire. So they were once this great empire, and they gradually and slowly decline. And a lot of this decline was in the 19th century, the 1800s. And one event that kind of helps Europeans realize the weakened nature of the Ottoman Empire is the Crimean War. If anyone pays attention to the news, Crimea was relatively recently in the news as well, because Russia, it was once part of the Ukraine, and I think it was in 2014, Russia invades the Crimean Peninsula right here where my mouse is, and takes it over from Ukraine, right? So Russia has this kind of intense desire to control Crimea even today. So this war was based on a small peninsula in the Black Sea, which I just pointed to here again, right? A small peninsula in the Black Sea. And at the time, it was controlled by the Ottomans. The Russians wanted it because it was located on the Black Sea, so it could be a region for a port city, right, where they could trade. And at this time, really, Russia did not have any warm water ports, which means that a port that would not freeze in the winter. Right, most of the Russian, you can't even see it here, most of the Russian ports that have access to the ocean, right, would be up in the north. So in the wintertime, they're frozen. For a good chunk of the year, almost half the year, they could be frozen. And so they needed this warm water port. And they believed the most logical place for that would be the Crimean Peninsula, which had access to the Black Sea. And from there, it can get out into the Mediterranean Sea and then into the greater Atlantic Ocean. So they declared war on the Ottomans in the year 1853. And this is kind of a good example of how geopolitics can cause something to become a larger scale event. So geopolitics essentially deals with how politics and geography mesh, right? How a geographic location could lead to political crisis, all right? And here you have Russia fighting over this small peninsula, but they're fighting over it because it has a lot more geographic significance, right? It has a significant geographic benefit or advantage to the Russians. The British and the French, in this effort at geopolitics, don't want to see Russia expand. Russia has kind of always been seen, for hundreds of years now, has been seen as kind of a threat to European order. And so they don't want to see Russia expand. So the British and the French get involved on the side of the Ottomans. And eventually kind of stop the Russians from taking control of Crimea. So the immediate goal of the Crimean War for the Russians was to take control of Crimea. The British and the French managed to help stop that from happening. However, this war does reveal to everyone involved how militaristically weak the Ottomans are. And so from this point, Russia kind of, even though they didn't win that one, sees advantages here and will begin helping other people, these Slavic peoples of Europe, helping them gain greater independence. At this time, in the 1800s, we have this emergence of nationalism, which we talked about, right, and pan-Slavism, which I believe we might have mentioned in the Nationalism and Revolution unit. But you have this growing sense of national identity or national connection between Russians and other people who speak similar languages in Southeastern Europe, who just so happen to be under the control of the Ottomans. And so Russians begin to help them gain independence. Some nations that could have benefited from this aid now, not Greece, but maybe Serbia, eventually Bulgaria, places we mentioned in our previous unit. So the Crimean War is kind of significant in that sense. All right, the Ottomans, the weakness in them comes in that they're a multi-ethnic empire. So here is the kind of the home base, so to speak, of the Ottoman Empire would be modern day Turkey, right over here. And so people who were ethnically Ottoman were they were the Turks. Uh, but however, they controlled people who were European, right? Serbians, Romanians, Hungarians at certain points, uh, Russian-speaking peoples, Middle Eastern peoples, Egyptians and Arabians and Syrians, right? Iraqis. And so they're very multi-ethnic. And we know that multi-ethnic empires might not fare well when you have intense nationalism intense nationalism, right? So for the Russians trying to help their nationalists or their cousins or younger siblings, the Slavic people in southeastern Europe, right? So you have that kind of weakening the Ottoman Empire, and you have that internal strife. So not just in Europe, but places like Egypt, for example, places like Syria, right? There might be resistance movements, rebellion movements there as well. You have a political group that's trying to kind of promote nationalism and democratic reforms in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire at this time, and they're known as the Young Turks. And in particular, the Young Turks are focusing on what will become modern-day Turkey. And so you have, even externally in the far parts of the empire, you have issues, but even at home, there are issues and movements for greater democracy happening closer to home for the Ottomans. By 1841, so about 10 or so years before this Crimean War, Egypt is already kind of partially independent. They have a loose relationship with the Ottomans, but they are kind of governing largely by themselves. And places like Britain and France will begin taking advantage of this and coming to kind of intervene there. During this time, they construct the Suez Canal as well. This is kind of financed by the British and French. And the Suez Canal, which is really important, and you'll learn more about this in class, is a canal that connects the Mediterranean Sea, here where my mouse is, to the Red Sea. So essentially what it does is, instead of allow people to travel from, say, Europe, say England, through the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and out to India, instead of having to go all the way around the tip of Africa to India. Another kind of crisis that happens in the Ottoman Empire during this time, a little bit later, is the Armenian genocide. Armenia is now an independent nation in this part of the map. And they're ethnically Christian. They don't get along with the Muslim majority Ottomans, and so even today this is still debated, was it actually a genocide? The Ottomans deny it was a genocide. Many of the people accept the reality that close to 1 million Armenians were killed as a result of this tension. So the Ottomans are facing a lot of issues at this time that are going to dramatically weaken it, and by the time World War I happens, or by the end of World War I, they're no longer going to exist.